at Wimbledon, when Grigor was playing against Jannik and I was sitting there, that made it easy to think how it could have been, because Grigor plays very similar to how I played. So that, I think, was one of the first times I thought, like, how would it have been to play Jannik in a match situation?
Roger Federer just sat down and gave his brutally honest take on the Sinner versus Alcaraz rivalry. And his prediction for the Australian Open is causing serious debate across tennis. He broke down their styles, compared them to his own game, and revealed which player he mentally puts himself in the shoes of when watching matches. His answer about who wins in Melbourne might surprise you. Who do you think Roger Federer is picking to win the Australian Open? Jannik Sinner or Carloz Alcaraz? Drop your guess in the comments before we reveal his actual take.
Yeah, no, everybody knows I'm too busy with my children and with my life at the minute, so yeah.
Roger Federer is retired, living his best life, traveling with family, and watching tennis as a fan instead of a competitor. But when he sits down to talk about the sport, people listen. Because this isn't some random commentator throwing out hot takes for clicks. This is someone who won 20 Grand Slams, dominated the sport for nearly 2 decades, and faced every possible style and challenge tennis could throw at him.
When I saw Jannik play against Novak in Shanghai, I didn't feel that way. I was just watching great tennis because they both play very different to how I play. Carlos, when I see him, I see more like, okay, I feel like there's more similarities in terms of what we would do, in terms of when we would hit a drop shot, when we would come to the net, how offensive, how passive do we decide to play, because I think we like to play on our terms. So I put myself more into Carlos's mindset and skin when I watch him, and with Sinner, just at one time I thought, like, okay, now I understand how I would probably play against Jannik.
So when Federer was asked about the current rivalry between Jannik Sinner and Carloz Alcaraz heading into the Australian Open, his perspective carried weight. And what he said reveals not just who he thinks will win, but how he sees the game itself evolving. Let's start with how Federer watches tennis now that he's retired. He explained that most of the time, he's just enjoying great tennis as a pure fan. But occasionally, something happens that makes him mentally put himself back on the court, wondering how he would have handled a specific situation or opponent.
The rivalries, in a sense, the rivalries you had to what we're watching today,
Yeah.
the Sinner-Alcaraz, and what you might think is going to play out here at this Australian Open.
That's, I think, why we're here. We're here to see what happens. And as we know about sports, anything can happen. Yeah, there's favorites, obviously, but still, now that the draw is out, I think every player shifts their view to that one player and nothing else almost, you know, and you enter the zone of, okay, the next 3, 4, 5 days, however long you have before that first round starts mattering clearly. And yeah, I mean, the rivalry between Alcaraz and Sinner, I think, is a great one. I mean, they play incredible tennis. I think that French Open final was unreal. I think the game, not that it needed it, but I think it was great that we had it, you know, because I feel like for a second, for a moment, the world stood still in the sporting world and watched towards Paris and what was going on, you know, in that epic fifth set, because it could have ended much, much sooner for Jannik, obviously. And then all of a sudden, it just ended up in this most crazy fashion, made it one of the greatest games, you know, we've ever had in our sport. So
one of those moments happened at Wimbledon when Grigor Dimitrov was playing against Jannik Sinner. Federer was sitting there watching, and because Dimitrov's style is so similar to how Federer played, elegant, fluid, mixing up pace and spins, it became easy for Federer to imagine himself in that match. That was one of the first times I thought, how would it have been to play Sinner in a match situation? Federer admitted. That's a fascinating insight because it shows Federer was specifically trying to visualize how his game would match up against Sinner's relentless baseline consistency and power. The fact that he needed Dimitrov as a proxy, someone whose game mirrors his own, shows that Sinner's style is so fundamentally different from Federer's that he couldn't just instinctively know how that matchup would play out. Then Federer mentioned watching Sinner play Novak Djokovic in Shanghai. But that match didn't trigger the same mental exercise. He was just watching great tennis because both Sinner and Djokovic play very differently from how Federer played. That's the key distinction Federer is making. Sinner's game is built on consistency, power from the baseline, and wearing opponents down through relentless pressure. That's not how Federer operated. Federer was about variety, creativity, coming to the net, changing pace, keeping opponents off balance. Now let's talk about Carloz Alcaraz, because this is where Federer's comments get really interesting. When Federer watches Alcaraz, he sees himself. Not in terms of specific shots necessarily, but in terms of mindset and decision-making. Federer said he can put himself more into Alcaraz's mindset and skin when watching him play. I see more similarities in terms of what we would do, when we would hit a drop shot, when we would come to the net, how offensive or passive we decide to play, Federer explained. I think we like to play on our terms. That last line is crucial. We like to play on our terms. That's the Federer mentality. Control the court, dictate play. Don't just react to what the opponent is doing. Impose your will and make them react to you. And Federer sees that same mentality in Alcaraz. Alcaraz doesn't just grind from the baseline hoping to outlast opponents. He attacks. He comes forward. He hits drop shots at unexpected moments. He takes risks because he trusts his ability to execute difficult shots under pressure. That's pure Federer philosophy, even if the specific techniques differ. So right there, without explicitly saying it, Federer has revealed something important. He relates more to Alcaraz's style than Sinner's. He sees more of himself in Alcaraz's approach to the game. That doesn't necessarily mean he's picking Alcaraz to win the Australian Open, but it shows where his natural bias might lean. When you identify with a player's style and mindset, it's hard not to root for them on some level.
I think it's good we still live off that momentum, and then they backed it up by playing each other in all those other finals, and everybody else is trying to keep up, and they're still trying to pull away, because what we've seen in terms of their progression in the last years, it's been wonderful. I practiced with both guys a little bit, and they're incredible ball strikers, and there's obviously more to come. I just hope they stay injury-free, obviously.
Federer was then asked directly about the Sinner-Alcaraz rivalry and what he thinks will play out at the Australian Open. His answer was diplomatic but revealing. "That's why we're here. We're here to see what happens," Federer said, acknowledging that anything can happen in sports, and there are favorites but no guarantees. But then he dove into what makes the rivalry so compelling. He brought up the French Open final between Sinner and Alcaraz, calling it unreal, and saying the tennis world stood still watching that epic fifth set. Federer pointed out that the match could have ended much sooner for Sinner. Alcaraz was down and seemingly out. But then it ended in the most crazy fashion and became one of the greatest matches the sport has ever had. That comment reveals something about Federer's view of Alcaraz. He's a player who refuses to quit, who finds ways to win even when the match seems lost, who creates dramatic moments that transcend the sport itself. Federer has been in those moments himself countless times. The 2017 Australian Open final against Nadal. The 2009 Wimbledon final against Roddick. The 2017 Wimbledon final against Cilic. Matches where he either came back from the brink or closed out tense situations through sheer will and shot-making brilliance. So when Federer praises Alcaraz for that French Open final comeback, he's recognizing a kindred spirit. Someone who thrives in those pressure moments and creates legendary matches. Then Federer talked about how the rivalry has continued beyond that French Open final, with Sinner and Alcaraz meeting in multiple other finals and everyone else trying to keep up while these two pull away from the pack. "What we've seen in terms of their progression in the last years has been wonderful," Federer said. "I practice with both guys a little bit, and they're incredible ball strikers. There's obviously more to come. I just hope they stay injury-free." So Federer has actually hit with both of them. He's seen their games up close. He knows the level they're operating at, and he's impressed by both. But notice he didn't say they play similarly or that he can't pick between them. He complimented their ball striking, a technical observation that applies to both, and expressed hope they avoid injuries. That's classic Federer diplomacy. He's not going to publicly declare one player better than the other or make a definitive prediction that could blow up in his face. But if you read between the lines of everything he said, there are clues about how he sees this rivalry. Federer relates to Alcaraz's style and mindset. He sees himself in how Alcaraz approaches the game. That's not nothing. That suggests Federer believes Alcaraz's style, the aggressive, creative, dictate-the-terms approach, is the winning formula in tennis. But Federer also has immense respect for Sinner's game. He acknowledged that watching Sinner required him to think differently about how matchups would work because Sinner's baseline consistency and power represent a different challenge entirely. Here's the reality that Federer understands better than almost anyone. Styles make fights. The Sinner-Alcaraz rivalry is compelling precisely because their styles contrast so perfectly. Sinner is the relentless baseline machine. Consistent power off both wings. Incredible return game. Doesn't give you anything for free. Wears you down physically and mentally until you crack. Alcaraz is the creative shot maker. Explosive athleticism. Willing to take risks. Comes forward, hits drop shots, changes pace constantly. Thrives in chaos and dramatic moments. When those two styles clash, who wins depends on conditions, surface, match situation, and who's executing their game plan better on that specific day. At the Australian Open, the hard courts favor power and consistency. That's Sinner's bread and butter. He won the tournament last year. He's comfortable on that surface. His game translates perfectly to the fast conditions in Melbourne. But Alcaraz has proven he can win on hard courts too. He won the US Open as a teenager. He's beaten Sinner on hard courts before. And his ability to create offense from defense, to turn desperate situations into winners through impossible shot-making, gives him a chance against anyone on any surface. Federer knows all of this. He's lived through these matchup dynamics his entire career. He faced Nadal on clay, knowing the surface favored his opponent's style. He faced Djokovic on hard courts and baseline battles that didn't suit his natural attacking game. So when Federer talks about the Sinner-Alcaraz rivalry, he's not just making surface-level observations. He's analyzing it through the lens of someone who spent 20 years figuring out how to beat opponents whose styles countered his own. And based on everything Federer said, here's what I think his actual prediction would be if he was forced to pick. Alcaraz has the higher ceiling, but Sinner has the more reliable game. That means in a best-of-5 match at the Australian Open, Sinner might be the safer pick because his consistency gives him more margin for error. He doesn't need to be brilliant. He just needs to be solid, and he'll wear down most opponents. But if Alcaraz is playing his best tennis, executing his aggressive game plan, hitting his spots, and thriving in the pressure moments, he's unbeatable, even by Sinner. Federer's comments about relating to Alcaraz's mindset suggest he believes that attacking, dictating style is ultimately superior when executed properly. But he also knows that style is higher risk. When it's on, it's devastating. When it's off, you lose to players like Sinner who just don't miss. So if I had to guess Federer's private prediction, not what he'd say publicly to be diplomatic, but what he actually thinks, I'd say he's picking Alcaraz to win the Australian Open if Alcaraz stays healthy and plays his best tennis. But Federer would also acknowledge that Sinner is the more consistent threat and might be the smarter bet if you're looking at probability rather than peak performance. The French Open final Federer praised so highly proves the point. Alcaraz was down, Sinner was cruising. The consistent baseline game was working perfectly. And then Alcaraz found another gear, started playing on his terms, and turned the match into chaos that favored his style. That's what Federer means when he says he relates to Alcaraz's approach. Federer spent his career doing exactly that, taking matches that seemed headed for straightforward baseline battles and turning them into showcases of creativity and aggression that opponents couldn't handle. Federer also made an interesting comment about how once the draw is out, every player shifts their focus to that one opponent in the first round and nothing else. Everything becomes about the immediate challenge, and you enter the zone of preparation. That's revealing because it shows Federer understands that predictions don't matter once the tournament starts. Sinner and Alcaraz might be the favorites, but they both have to navigate difficult draws, handle pressure, and execute when it matters. Djokovic is still lurking. Other players are dangerous. Upsets happen. That's why Federer's answer about "we're here to see what happens" is actually the most honest take possible. But if you forced me to interpret Federer's true feelings based on everything he said, here's my conclusion. Federer sees Alcaraz as the spiritual successor to his style of tennis. He relates to Alcaraz's creativity, aggression, and ability to create legendary moments. And deep down, Federer probably believes that style, when executed at the highest level, beats the consistent baseline approach that Sinner represents. But Federer also has too much respect for the sport to make definitive predictions. He knows tennis is unpredictable. He's lived through enough upsets and dramatic twists to know that anything can happen in a 2-week Grand Slam tournament. So Federer's real answer is this: Alcaraz has the style and mentality to win. Sinner has the consistency and reliability to win. And we're all lucky to be watching this rivalry unfold because it's giving us the kind of epic matches and dramatic moments that define tennis history. So there you have it. Roger Federer sees himself in Carloz Alcaraz's creative attacking style, but respects Jannik Sinner's relentless consistency, and he's smart enough not to make definitive predictions. If you want more breakdowns of tennis's biggest rivalries and what legends really think, smash that like button and subscribe. Who's your pick to win the Australian Open? Sinner, Alcaraz, or someone else?